Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today I've got the first ever rematch that we've got from my battle reports. I guess there's only 8 of them, so it's not that likely there'd be one yet, but Jake was actually my first opponent in the first battle report that I did, also running Infernal Dwarves. I actually started this video, and I recorded 10 minutes before I realised my microphone wasn't plugged in, so I'm going over a few things that may mean that I forget, because I think I've already spoken about something before, but we'll see how it goes. He has brought an Infernal Dwarf list with a Wizard Master who can take Alchemy or Pyro. He's got a BSB with a Legion standard and is fairly defensive. He's got an Adept of Witchcraft. He's got a big block of Infernal Warriors, which is where his BSB will be most likely because of the Legion standard. The Infernal Warriors have Blunderbusses. He's got 3 units of Vassal Levies. He's got big unit of Cunning Incarnates. He's got 2 medium units of Taruk Anointed, Bastion, 2 Titan Mortars, and 5 Vassal Cav. So, not that different from a lot of the Infernal Dwarf lists that I've been seeing and playing against recently. A lot of people go the 5 or 6 Taruk Anointed with the Taruk BSB in there, but the smaller support unit is also pretty solid. Basically, I kind of expected this to be quite a defensive list. Basically, that the blunderbusses don't get to shoot that often typically, but they sort of choose their moment and get off a pretty devastating volley usually. Or Raven's Wing from Witchcraft sometimes allows them to jump into a really troublesome spot. Yeah, from the little picture before this video, you may get the impression that this is not about to go all that well. But when I was doing pairings, I didn't have a great matrix, but I thought this was my best matchup, basically, because I played a lot against Infernal Dwarves. It's not so much I find them an easy army, but I find they're generally a very static army. And they need to play well to get the most out of their shooting. So I feel that it's always good to play against them. Like, they're sort of the best gun line to play against because your counterplay matters a lot more than when it's 30-inch range, volley fire, all that kind of stuff, where you sort of... A lot of what you do is less effective, whereas the short range of Infernal Dwarves means that the Infernal Dwarf player actually has to bring his units to bear to get the most out of them. In terms of purely in his list, I think one of the mistakes I made when looking at it was the Cunning Incarnates are a lot better than I thought. Basically, they're a big threat to my Chariot character unit. Really, the only thing I think there that can beat them in combat, obviously combat res and stuff can just get them out, but one-on-one, basically the only thing in his list that I would think can fight the Chariot unit is them. And I didn't really respect that enough when I was thinking that it was a good pairing. So when I started to look at the matchup more throughout the week, I was thinking, those Cunning Incarnates are the most troublesome thing that there is in the list, and they could actually be quite difficult. But at the same time, I sort of felt like if I can get a clean charge on them, if I can get a combo charge and a couple of buffs up, then I can deal with them. But they are probably the thing in his list that I am most frightened by. Also, I mean, his shooting can just pop off and remove monsters and characters if it happens to roll well, but that's sort of always the case with this kind of a list. When we did the pairings, basically, the way it worked out was neither Jake nor I chose this matchup, basically. So all the other 4 matchups were specifically selected by someone, and Jake and I were just the people that were left over. So I don't know what that says about their strategy and looking at list pairings, but for me it was basically because I didn't have many good options to choose from. So it was before the game, I thought it was fortunate that I sort of fell into my best matchup, particularly because no one in my team wanted to play the Infernal Dwarf list. So I wanted to play it the most out of all my pairings, and I wanted to play it more than anyone else in my team. So this was sort of the best case scenario, given that we didn't specifically try and manufacture this matchup to happen. Sorry, I've got to go over to here. Okay. So this is after deployment. What happened was I won the roll for sides. It was the big sides, big middle deployment. I chose the big middle and the top, basically so that he didn't get the ruins and the walls. And I chose the big middle because it would help me with the objective, which was the center objective, and sort of push what I expected to be his centrally deployed units, which is the blocks, further back down and sort of jam them up between those two impassables a bit better. Jake dropped everything to go first, as you can see he did, and then I counter-deployed him. And by counter-deploy, I mean put my units in the worst possible places that I could put them, because those giants over on the left-hand side don't want to fight the Anointed particularly. They could fight, 2-on-1, they could fight them. In the flank, they could fight them. But realistically, I want to sort of, maybe one giant distracts them and takes up their time. The other giant goes around a bit and is more relevant. But because he's got his Bastion unit on the other side of that house, sort of that whole half of the board that those giants are meant to be manning is against things that they don't want to fight. And I put my units there. So it's not as if I deployed and Jake was like, cool, well, I know that the giants only have AP 0, so I'm going to put my high armor things on this side and make it difficult for those giants to be relevant. I did that to myself. Anyway, I don't know why. I don't know. Some of these decisions that I made, I have no idea what I was thinking. Particularly because over the other side, they've still got the Taruk to deal with, but the vassals that they might well be able to get into with their vanguards and just generally sort of fitting in as a single model into hard to get to places, they might actually get to fight them and be really handy. The Gore-Tex, on the other hand, are actually kind of fine fighting the Bastion unit because they don't care about combat res if they lose. Like that. I don't have a PSB, but Leadership 9, stubborn, most of the time I'm happy with that and he's going to be able to do plenty of damage if he gets into that combat. They're also pretty much fine fighting the Taruk. If they're that far out and it's hard for Jake to get buffs onto the Taruk, 1-on-1, I think even if he charges, I win that fight. So the monsters should be switched in their flanks. Or alternatively, this is what Jake suggested, I could have just put a giant and a Gore-Tack on each flank, and then the giant basically sacrifices himself so that the Gorgon can take off the Anointed. But instead I went with the worst option, which you'll see didn't pan out too well. The forest, my Seat of the Dark Forest, I also should have put pretty much under where I was going to deploy my characters. So I had an idea of deployment in my head and where I could be and what things would be where. And having the 15-inch up was actually probably meant that I didn't need to have the same idea of how I should deploy and where I should place my stuff. So that forest should be further up, because that means that if Jake pushes his units up in the middle, which is what he did, and frankly surprised me because normally ID players aren't that aggressive. So I was caught out a little bit by the smart play, basically. He made the right move, and I was like, actually, you know what? Wasn't expecting you to move forward. But if I'd had that further up, it would have meant that I basically was able to help to zone the middle, and if I had my monsters in better positions, theoretically, a turn 2, maybe 3, they're going to win on those flanks. If the Giants are on the right-hand flank, they might end up just sort of annoying the Taruk enough so they can't come crashing down. But on the left-hand flank, I think that those Gore-Tax would really, really be problematic, basically. If I gave him difficult options. So if he couldn't just devote everything to trying to deal with the Gore-Tax. So I should have basically had the forest further up so that I could stay there, try and zone the center a bit, and still get my +2 to cast while I deal with the war machines and stuff. And then threaten, because I've got the longer charge range, obviously, threaten counter charges and everything if he moves up too aggressively. Next will be Jake's, I think. Yeah, so... Oh, and the other thing with those giants, they have Vanguard. And they didn't get anywhere relevant. So, Why did I could have put them in better places where their Vanguard would be relevant, given that I kept them sober to give them Vanguard, but whatever. Here we are. This is what we're dealing with. This is after Jake's movement phase, not his magic. So, I mean, basically, as you can see, he's moved up aggressively, which I didn't really think. I think the Bastion block and the Cunning Incarnates are 18 away from my Chariots. And he's just sort of moved up so that there's nothing charging the flanks of his Anointed on the left or the right. And he's trying to basically zone me out. So I think that... Where can you go? Yeah, I mean, I don't think I can get out of arc anywhere with either of the Gortax. The Giant on the left obviously can, but he's less troublesome because of his AP 0, basically. Okay, that's a little bit far ahead. So his shooting didn't do much because of Dark Rain, basically. And I think that his magic killed a couple of gargoyles, did a wound to my Beast Lord with the attribute, but nothing else hugely relevant. And I looked at it because basically there were no flammable tokens on my Chariot unit. I was a 10-inch charge from his Anointed, and like stupidly but important in my head was the fact like, oh, I can't use my forest, so I might as well charge, which, I mean, at this point in the round, my team was up 49 points to 31. So we needed 2 points to get a win in the game, so a win in the round, so I shouldn't really be taking massive risks. But I decided I'm going to charge my Chariots into those Anointed because this was my best chance to deal with them, which was a risk. And I think, like, if you look at the maths, like, unbuffed, I think I do 9-ish wounds. So with a buff of strength, I'm pretty sure it went to 11 or 12. But basically, it was like one of those things where there's sort of, I mean, close enough to like a 50-50 chance that I don't break him. And I think, well, because I only have one offensive buff, because I should have taken Savage Fury and I took Bees instead, but that's another thing. If I'd taken Savage Fury, maybe I've got 2 offensive buffs that maybe can push it, so it's a little bit better than 50. But as it stands, like realistically, and he's got a Binding Scroll, Jake could bind +1 strength if he wanted to. And then it's very unlikely that I actually break those Incarnates, which means that no matter what is going to happen, and I'll just move to that position because I'm discussing it, no matter what's going to happen, realistically, I'm going to get flank charged by one of those Vassal blocks. So my Reform can take me, because of how I charged, I'm within an inch of those Vassals on the right, so my Reform can keep them in the front, but then the other guys are in the flank, or I can Reform the other way to keep the other guys in the front, but give the guys on the right the flank. Yeah, so basically, this is a big risk that I think doesn't favour me. Like, it's not like I'm sort of going on a 20% chance and this could win me the game, but there's a few things here that I think make it a bit dumb, and one is the fact that, realistically, I'm pretty sure the odds favour my opponent, no matter what happens. I haven't progressed the flanks well enough, and if I lose my Chariot characters, it's basically game over. But then, even if you look at the position, I'll zoom in again. Let's say that I win the combat. I managed to roll high enough that I break his Steadfast, and but then presumably, because I've done 12 wounds, he probably fails the Supernal test. So he pops. Then basically what I do is I've still got to give a flank charge to one of these guys, I think. Maybe reforming on my center. There might be enough room, because I reform on my center, there might be enough room that I can keep both the Vassals in the flank and be out of line of sight of the Bastion block. But then, realistically, all he does, because the Giants aren't in a relevant position, and the Gortax are facing the other way, he'll just bring his Blunderbusters out, so that he's got a round of shooting and magic all of my characters. he's still got the mortars alive. As you can see, I got my Wildhorn ambushes on turn 1. And then, as I didn't actually think about this, but then if he does enough wounds to those Chariot characters, in his next round, Jake can just bind my attribute from Druidism, which means that I can't get any wounds back, and all of a sudden my Chariots are basically sort of sitting there, not in a handy position at all, and not able to heal. And I think, given mortars, given blunderbusses, given magic, particularly with the attribute from pyromancy, I think that there's a good chance that I lose a character, 2, and then it's not worth it anyway. Like, even though I've gotten that unit, I've gotten that position, the position doesn't get me anything. I probably lose characters, and the end result is probably still that it's a bad idea for me. So that turn 1 charge, I don't think there's any way that ends up well for me. It's just a stupid decision. But anyway, I moved the Gorgons up, and I wasn't unhappy about their positioning. The Giants are in terrible spots, but I wasn't unhappy about where the Gorgons are right now. As the chaff there on the Histrook Anointed can't, with their overrun, hit the Gortak is the main idea happening over there. Are we off this again? Okay. And this is after combat, so basically all I did was I got my magic fell flat, which is one of the reasons why I should have more than, because Healing Waters isn't really a relevant buff at the moment, because he's got Flaming. I should have taken Savage Fury over Bees, given that his War Machines have a 4-up armor save. But I failed to cast +1 Strength. It was a 9/6 magic phase. I failed to cast +1 Strength. I failed to cast Stone Skin. So then I had 4 dice left against his 6. I didn't have any buffs, but then I still managed to get, with my 4 dice, get a Totem Beast off because he rolled low and I rolled high. So I didn't get either of the spells that I wanted, but I got a spell off. So it was a bit of a weird phase. And I brought the Totem Beast down at the bottom. His Anointed did a wound to my Druid, who was in the second rank, so that was from the grinds, and then 2 wounds to my Beast Lord. So that was 2 wounds with just the champion and the guy on the right. So they're 7 attacks and the 2 grinds that he copped from the unit. My Shaman was fine because he's got the reroll. You need to reroll successful to wound. They're hitting him on 5s. Like, he was always likely to be pretty resilient to their attacks, at least until they got reroll to wound from the tokens or the attribute or whatever. And then, I basically just had, as I said, I have to give one of these guys a flank. And I think I gave it to those guys because the Gortak can then, if I stick, come in on the counter charge. I put my Beast Lord as far away as possible so that he could only get 3 attacks, 2 grinds on him. My Druid could be attacked by 2 guys if he wanted. And then my Shaman, I'm still sitting there thinking, sure, once they've got flammable tokens on me, he's not getting the reroll to wound. But hitting him on 5s, wounding him on 5s is much better than the alternative of having either of the other characters in that position, whereas they're getting hit by both the flanking unit and the 2 Taruk Anointed. So that was basically the thought process there. I may be missing some... Yeah, there's a lot of stuff that happened. Okay. Alright, so I'll just summarize it from here. Basically, those guys did come into the flank. I rolled high in my combat. I think I did 10 wounds and he had a static of 11. He killed my Druid, which was a little bit surprising. I did take +1 strength and -1 toughness on him, but he had 3 attacks hitting on 5s, wounding on 4s with rerolls, and then 2 strength, 3 hits, so wounding on 5s with rerolls. So I was a little bit surprised he did the 3 wounds to him, but, whatever. So I lost combat by 1. With fear, that was -2, and then I rolled an 8, which is... one of the things with this list is I don't want those Chariots losing combat because I don't have a BSB. The theory is kind of that even if I had a BSB, leadership 7 rerollable isn't that reliable, so I could have easily failed it twice, even if I had a BSB, and I think the Wizard Master is more valuable, but this is one of those times where I'm like, damn, I wish I had that BSB. And I mean, if I'd managed to get Savage Fury up, or even if I'd taken with Druidism rather than regen, if I'd taken the Beastherd Hereditary, either one of those being on that unit would mean that it would have been an 8. So I did get lucky in that round of combat. I did more wounds than I should have. He maybe did about average on his wounds. But I definitely rolled higher because he rolled poorly on his saves for the Incarnates. And if I'd had that luck, though, it would have been okay if I'd had Savage Fury or the Hereditary on them. Because rolling the 8, it's like, I lost the Druid in the combat, but, you know, I would have at least had those guys still alive, basically. But they didn't. They lost. They got run down, and pretty much, like, I mean, you can sort of see from the position there, that means that I can't win the objective because I can't take him off the center with enough stuff. He got the overrun into my Gore attack, which meant that in my round he'd be in combat, but likely in the opponent's round he might not if they broke. But I mean, all that really is there is the fact that I'm going to die to shooting, and I can't, because my Giants are in such a shit position, they can't do anything. So I've got to win a game against an entire army with 2 Gore attacks. And it's not very likely. So in this next one, yeah, so where the Gore attack was overran into, I killed, like, I don't know, however many Vassal Levies left where that yellow X is. And they lost some to the Shaman. But however many of them is left, the Gorgon killed that many, basically. Then the Cunning Incarnate's got the charge into his flank and killed him. The Giant on the left, I basically sat him so that only 2 Anointed could fight him. And he copped 5 wounds and only did 1 back. So he had 10 auto hits, wounding on 4s. And my opponent had a 4-up save, but I only did 1. So I think, I mean, I got a little bit unlucky there, but I lose the combat, even with only 2 guys fighting. So it doesn't really matter if I'm lucky or not. I then got really lucky because he had like a leadership 3 break test, and he stuck on double 1s. But I needed a 9 to get in there with my other Giant, and he couldn't make it on that charge. The Gortak on the right, who's still alive, charged. He failed his frenzy. No, he didn't fail his frenzy. He charged those guys, thinking they were probably going to flee, but that opened up. I don't know. Maybe I didn't. I don't know. Whatever happened, he failed his redirect here, which was disappointing because it meant that I didn't have a chance at getting into either of the other 2 units, so I might get points off of. But whatever, that sort of thing happens. The Totem Beast down the bottom killed his War Machine, panicked the other War Machine, and panicked the Vassal Levies who were there through to the terrain, and then out of 20 4+ dangerous terrain tests, he failed 15 of them, so they're now below 25%. So that Totem Beast is basically, I think actually by the end of the game, he got more points than anything else in my list. I made the mistake last game, thinking the entire time Totem Beast had fear, and I made my opponent take fear tests. He never failed anyone, so it didn't matter to the game. But then at the end of the game, one of my opponent's teammates pointed out, hey, like, the Totem Beast doesn't have fear. I went, oh, like, shit, no, you're right. And then I made the exact same mistake all of this game, and on like turn 4 or turn 5, Jack was like, hey, actually those guys don't have fear. It's okay, because I haven't failed any of them, but yeah. And I was just, like, it's one of those feel-bad moments where you're like, and you know what, I knew that. I knew it didn't cause fear, because I was told that last time. But, like, something in my brain is just, no, Totem Beasts have fear, and I can't get that out of my head, apparently, so I gotta try really hard on my next game to not try to think they cause fear, because it's, like, I mean, it could have been really, not so much this game, but in some of the games it could be really important if I forget that someone fails fear, and it could really matter to the combat, so I gotta get that out of my brain. Yeah, but basically, looking at the board, those Wildhorns at the top are dead. Failing the charge with the giant meant that there was no chance that I get the other one in. They're going to pivot and probably kill the other giant. I've got the bottom of the board secure, but that doesn't matter. And now is basically a time of I have one Gortak to beat an entire army, which is not very likely. I don't know what my next slide is, but we'll just go with it. Yes, that's after him failing a charge, after the giant dying, Totem Beast going into the other War Machine. Wildhorn's actually reformed and moved away from the Anointed, so that if the Anointed charged them, they could flee again. Then... okay. Yeah, so basically, this is now what is before his turn. His Taruk Anointed charged the giant. I flee. That causes a panic on my Wildhorns, who also flee. And then it means the other Taruk don't charge. They just sit there, ready to chase anything off that... Oh, no, actually, sorry. What happened was my giant didn't go through the Wildhorns. And then when his Taruk Anointed rolled high enough to catch him, my Wildhorns panicked and went back the other way, away from the Taruk Anointed. And then the other Taruk could just sit there and be ready to charge things off. Pretty much. Let's see if I have any more pictures here. I don't know. We'll take the risk. Oh, I do have a couple more, but those are basically the same. Okay. Basically, this is the summary where my Totem Beast eventually is going to kill that War Machine down the bottom. And pretty much, knowing that those Wildhorns up the top are dead, and how I can't get any more points. Like, I have to get the Vassals on the right-hand side, and I'm assuming, half leadership, non-reliable rally, they'll die. I get the War Machine, obviously, but the Gortak can't charge anything that's not going to rally in the next turn, so I'm not going to get any more points. But if I keep the Gortak alive and I keep the Wildhorns down the bottom alive, it'll be a 19-1, and it'll be a draw on the round, which I was really hoping for a lot better then, but given how terribly I've played, 1 point was probably more than I should deserve. But, yes, that's just after my Totem Beast killed his War Machine. No, okay, that's the last one. But, yeah, basically, so I haven't got another one after this. He charges the Wildhorns up for the top. I basically just move my Gortak down to try and get away. I move my Wildhorns over to the left to try and get away, but one cascading fire on them, and they failed their panic and ran off the board, so it didn't really matter. And then, because I'd already moved my Gortak away, he wasn't anywhere where he could charge anything and get any points, so... probably... Knowing how much he could put into those Wildhorns probably would have been smarter to keep the Gortak up, but I think he mostly could have avoided me with the other stuff up there anyway. Frankly, I think if I was closer up, his blunderbusses could probably still, over the 2 turns, get my my Wildhorns off the board, and then with magic, he'd do enough wounds to my Gortak that my Gortak couldn't fight anything there anyway. But yeah, I mean, I was just throwing shit at the wall and seeing what sticks at this point. Yeah, there are a lot of bad decisions. I think my deployment ideas there really fucked me. And that turn 1 charge was just a really, really bad idea. There's a world in which that goes right, and it's really good for me, but that's not a very likely world. There's so much that was likely to go wrong, even if the charge had been wildly successful and I'd popped the unit in 1. Because then I'd just get surrounded by everything and shot to death, basically. I was pretty disappointed with the result of this game. But at least it was one of those things where, I don't know how you guys feel when you lose games, but this one was sort of like, I played so shit. I didn't deserve any points. Like Jake played well. I thought he deployed well. His first turn was good and smart and safe, and he had everything covered. He didn't have any obvious mistakes or weak spots. And I, without having an obvious oh, this is where I'm going to get you, just completely capitulated and lost the game for myself. So I think, speaking of Jake, he was sort of yeah, I mean, turn 1 I had agency, but after that there was just it was all very straightforward, and I barely had to make any decisions. So I'd be more unhappy if I'd gotten really unlucky. Like if that charge had actually been a really good idea that opened up the game. So I was like, oh, it's risky on a 10, but if I make it, like I'm in the driver's seat. It's a bad charge even if I make it and I win. So yeah, it was just there was so much bad play in this game that my reaction is just like I deserve 0. This is a completely fair result for this game because it was so poor. So not a great battle report for me to sort of show off and be like, hey, look how smart I am. Not a great battle report for anyone to learn anything from, but maybe you can look at this and go like, hey, this is how not to play 9th Age. These are mistakes that are being made that now I can think about and go like, hey, I remember Max did this a while ago. I can avoid doing that. So hopefully it was in some way entertaining, maybe in some way helpful in an anti-instructional way. But regardless, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I hope I've got a better game to show you for my next round. And I hope you'll stay with me then and you haven't lost all faith in me as a player. See you guys.